Garth walked into the Mountain Earl Adams gun store on a Saturday morning in July, looking exactly like what he was. A working man. Worn leather jacket, faded jeans, boots with heels worn down from years of concrete floors and long shifts. He didn't check his reflection in the glass door on the way in, didn't fix his collar, didn't straighten up for anyone. He approached the counter, looked through the glass at the rows of pistols lined up under the fluorescent lights, and pointed to one near the center. "I'd like to see the Glock 19, he said. Ashley looked up first. She was 27, the senior sales associate, and she had a habit of reading people the way some people read the weather. Quickly, confidently, and often wrongly. She scanned him from head to toe, jacket, jeans, the calm way he stood with his hands relaxed at his sides. Then she smiled that special smile of someone who has already decided the answer before hearing the question. "You do know this model costs around $800, right?" She said politely, almost kindly, the way you warn someone that the restaurant is out of their price range. But the subtext wasn't kind at all. Brooke stood 2 steps to Ashley's right and, leaning slightly toward Jade, said loud enough to be heard, "Maybe we should send him to Voldemort." They laughed softly, not deliberately cruel, just a quiet, dismissive chuckle from people who had already placed this man in a certain category and found that category amusing. Garth looked at them. Not through them, not past them, straight at them, with full attention. The way someone looks at something they are trying to understand, not something they are trying to avoid. Then he smiled. It wasn't the smile of an embarrassed man. It wasn't the tight, restrained smile of someone swallowing anger. It was a calm smile, so calm it almost seemed out of place in that room. That kind of calm that doesn't come from the absence of worries, but from having already survived everything worth worrying about. It was the smile of a man who had stood in rooms far more dangerous than this one and had learned that the most important thing you can do in any room is remain yourself. Ashley's smile faded before she understood why. Something in his expression unsettled her in a way she couldn't name. She had expected embarrassment, or a defensive reaction, or the stubborn pride of a man who had been slighted. She had not expected this quiet, unhurried confidence that suddenly made her uncomfortable, as if she were the one being evaluated. Before anyone could say anything else, Garth turned, found a chair in the far corner of the store, back to the wall, facing the entrance, and sat down. He folded his hands in his lap and waited. If you believe that the quietest person in the room is often the one who has the most to say, hit like right now. Write in the comments where you're from, you bastard. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today and subscribe to the channel, because in 15 minutes a woman is going to walk in through the back door and make this whole room freeze. Ashley watched him sit and felt a mix of irritation and something else. The irritation of someone whose performance hadn't produced the desired effect. She exchanged a glance with Brooke. Brooke shrugged. The moment passed or seemed to. Other customers came in. The morning went on as usual. Jade didn't let it go quite so easily. She was the youngest of the 3, 25, and she had a quieter way of seeing the world. She had laughed earlier, reflexively, but now she walked over to the corner where Garth sat and settled into the chair beside him with such complete self-possession that she herself felt something she couldn't quite name. Not exactly guilt, something closer to curiosity or unease. She took a glass of water from behind the counter, crossed the floor without drawing attention, and set it on the small table next to his chair. Garth looked up at her. She said nothing, simply turned and walked back to the counter. He followed her with his eyes. He didn't say thank you out loud, but he took the glass and drank. For a moment he looked at the back of Jade's head with an expression that was perhaps even more attentive than before. 15 minutes passed. New customers entered. Sport coat, expensive watch, that easy confidence that comes from knowing you belong everywhere you go. Ashley's posture changed in seconds, shoulders back, voice warmer. Brooke appeared out of nowhere with brochures. All 3 materialized around this man like sunflowers turning toward the light. Garth watched it all from his corner chair without saying a single word. Jade was the first to break away from the group. Ashley was deep in her product presentation and Jade used the moment to slip down to the far end of the counter, closest to where Garth sat today. "What model were you wanting to see?" she asked quietly. "Glock 19, he said. 5th generation. I want to check the trigger pull weight on the US version, compare the loaded and unloaded magazine weight. I read the barrel length to effective range ratios for home defense at close distance." Jade froze for a second. He wasn't speaking like someone who had read a couple of articles on the internet before coming in. He spoke like someone for whom firearms were not new. He knew the terminology the way a mechanic knows engines, not because he once studied it, but because he had lived with it. "You've worked with this platform before," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "A little," he said. She held his gaze for a second, then pulled the federal background check form from under the counter. "The standard document. You need to fill this out before we can show you anything from the case," she said. "Standard procedure." He nodded, took the form and pen, and began filling it out. When she returned, the form lay on the counter, completed in the clear, confident handwriting of a man who had signed many official documents in his life. She placed the pistol on the felt mat and reached for the form and stopped. She read the line "Previous service." "Read it again." Her eyes slid down the page to the emergency contact line, to the box for nearest relative, and she read that too. Something shifted in her face. Not quite surprise, but a weight resettling. Slowly she raised her eyes across the entire store to where Garth Saturday. He was still in the same posture. Straight back, hands on his knees, gaze on the front door. Jade carefully folded the form, placed it on the counter, and said nothing. But she no longer looked at Garth the way she had before. The back door opened at 11:14 in the morning. Claire Harrow came in from the stockroom the way she always did on Saturday mornings. Fast, already thinking about the inventory discrepancies she had found and mentally drafting the email she needed to send. She was 34 and carried herself like a woman who had built something real with her own hands, her own grief, and her own will. A woman who had learned that the only way to keep anything standing is to keep moving. Her dark honey hair was simply pulled back. She wore a white button-up shirt, tactical pants, and a small name tag on her chest that read Harrow, owner. By any ordinary standard, she was the kind of woman people usually notice when she enters a room, but she wasn't thinking about that. She was thinking about inventory. She took 3 steps from the door before she stopped. It wasn't a sound that stopped her. It was the sight of the man sitting in the corner chair, that chair with its back to the wall that every person who has ever been in a combat zone eventually gravitates toward without thinking. Sitting with his hands on his knees and his gaze on the front door, in the posture of someone who had learned to be ready not as discipline, but as reflex. Claire Harrow had grown up watching her father sit exactly like that. She stood in the middle of the floor for a few seconds. Around her the store went on with its normal life. Ashley was still talking to the man in the sport coat. Brooke was restocking the shelf. Jade stood very still behind the counter. None of them saw what Claire saw. None of them were looking for it. She walked straight to Garth, not around the counter, not through the formalities of a sales transaction. She crossed the open floor, stopped in front of his chair, and looked at him the way her father had taught her to look at the world, not at the surface of things, but into them. "Did you serve?" she asked. Her voice was not the voice of a business owner managing the situation. It was the voice of someone asking a question whose answer truly matters. Garth looked up at her. Something in the directness of her face, in the absence of games, made him answer without the usual evasions. 101st Airborne, he said. 8 years. Claire Harrow closed her eyes for just a moment, long enough to make something personal of what she had just heard. When she opened them again, her expression held something that cannot be faked and cannot be learned. That special quality of someone who loved a soldier, lost him, and never quite stopped carrying the full weight of that loss. She took one small step back, straightened, and raised her right hand in a military salute, clear, slow, and absolutely sincere. "Sir," she said, "it is an honor." The store went quiet. Ashley's mouth opened and didn't close right away. The man in the sport coat turned. Brooke turned from the shelf she was stocking and froze with a box of ammunition in each hand. Jade looked at Claire, then at Garth, then at the folded form on the counter, and the weight of what she had read settled on her like a second understanding. Garth looked at Claire for a long time. He didn't stand. He didn't speak immediately. He simply let the gesture reach its target exactly as it was intended, not as performance, not as transaction, but as something given freely by someone who understood exactly what he was giving and why. Then, quietly, he said, "Thank you." It was the most he had spoken in the last 45 minutes. And it was exactly all he needed to say. Claire led him to her office not because the situation required it, but because she didn't want to have this conversation in the middle of the sales floor. She had things she wanted to say that deserved a quieter space. The office was small and practical. Desk, 2 chairs, filing cabinets, a corkboard covered with supplier contacts and compliance notes. On the desk, positioned to be the first thing you saw when you sat down, was a framed 8x10 photograph of a man in dress uniform in front of the American flag. He was smiling with that simple, unforced joy of someone who fully believed in what he was doing. He was handsome in that straight, unconscious way of men who never thought much about their looks. In his eyes was the kind of payment photographs usually don't capture, but this one did. Sergeant First Class David Harrow. Killed in action, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, 2012. Claire had been 21 then. She didn't explain the photograph right away. She simply sat down across from Garth, let him see it, and waited to see what would happen next. "I want to apologize for what happened this morning," she said. "In my store, with my staff. That should not have happened." Garth looked at the photograph, then at her. His expression was unhurried. "It wasn't your fault," he said. "This is my business. It's my responsibility," she replied. She told him briefly, without drama, about her father, about what it was like to grow up in a house where service wasn't an abstraction but an everyday reality, with its discipline, its sacrifice, and the love that flowed underneath it all like an underwater current. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 9. Not because he thought it was important for her to be armed, but because he thought it was important for her to understand that a tool is only as good or as dangerous as the person holding it, and that responsibility isn't a concept you teach abstractly. You teach it with your hands, you teach it by showing up and doing it. And her father showed up and did it every day of her life in everything that mattered. She didn't fully realize how extraordinary that ordinary constancy was until he was gone. Until the phone call she received one Tuesday morning in March while she was in her 3rd year of college preparing for a contracts law exam she never took. Until the careful, official, apologetic voice on the other end of the line, so that she understood everything even before the words came. Until the folded flag they handed her at the grave, held by a soldier who was probably no older than 22, with a solemnity she would never forget. Until the months that followed, that special, matte silence of grief that makes no noise because the person you miss never needed noise to fill a room. Until the decision that finally came. The only thing she could think to do with that grief, with the death benefit and the small savings her father had left, was to build something in his honor, a place where people who had served the way he served could walk in and be received the way he deserved, when no one would look at a man's jacket and decide the conversation was over. "That's what this place is supposed to be," she said. "That's what it's supposed to mean." She fell silent, looking at the photograph. This morning it wasn't. Garth was quiet. He looked at the photograph again, the way you look when you recognize something in it, not when you simply see it. He would be proud of you, he said, without sentimentality, the way a man says the truth. Claire looked at him. For a moment she said nothing. It wasn't the first time someone had told her that, but it was the first time in a long while it had come from someone who wanted nothing from her. No sympathy, no approval, no bridge to his own story. He simply said it because it was what he saw. "Tell me about your daughter," she said. He didn't tell her everything, but he told her the important parts. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, which made Claire smile. Her mother, Diana, had died 22 months earlier. Breast cancer, caught late, fought desperately. Garth had left the army after his 2nd contract extension because Diana's treatment had reached the stage where she needed someone at home, and he had made the choice without hesitation. Now he worked as a welder at a metal fabrication plant outside Cedar Falls on the night shift, which meant Sophie was home alone from 4:30 in the afternoon until late at night. "I want a firearm in the house, in a locked safe," he said. "She knows not to touch it, but I want to know it's there." He said it simply, without justification, without asking for permission or approval, just explaining. Claire nodded. She understood the special arithmetic of that decision, the mathematics of love and risk, and what you do when you are the only line of defense between your child and a world that doesn't ask permission. "Let's go get you what you came for," she said. She walked back out onto the sales floor with Garth beside her, and the temperature in the room changed the way a room changes when its owner returns with something settled in her gaze. Ashley and Brooke both saw Claire coming. Both straightened without being told. Claire stopped at the counter. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke in the measured tone of someone who has learned that the most serious things do not require volume. "Ashley," she said, "can you explain to me why this customer sat in that chair for nearly an hour when the model he asked for is in stock and in the case?" Ashley opened her mouth. What came out was the version of the explanation she had been assembling in her head. Protocol, verification, procedure. The words were technically accurate and completely beside the point, and both of them knew it. Our procedures apply to every customer the same way, Claire said. They are not a tool we use to manage people we decide we don't want in here. They don't change depending on what jacket someone is wearing. She paused. Is that clear? Yes, Ashley said. Her voice was quieter than usual. Claire turned, including Brooke in what she said without highlighting either, and then did something she hadn't planned when she left the office. She turned back to Ashley and said, quietly but clearly and in front of everyone, "The man you laughed at this morning received the Army Commendation Medal for pulling 3 of his comrades out of a kill zone during an ambush in Afghanistan in 2013. That information was in the system, in the Veteran Priority Registry this store has kept for 4 years. It was there. Anyone who had looked could have seen it." Jade, at the far end of the counter, stood completely still. She looked. She saw. She said nothing. And the weight of that awareness settled in her chest with a certain uncomfortable heaviness. Ashley said nothing. She looked at the counter, then at Garth, who stood quietly in the doorway of the back hallway watching Claire with an expression that wasn't exactly surprise, but something close, the look of a man meeting someone else who lives by a code he recognizes. "You didn't have to do that," Garth said to Claire. Claire looked at him steadily. "Yes, I did," she replied. "Not for you. For what this place is supposed to be." The afternoon light poured through the display windows, long and warm. By the time Ashley found herself alone with Claire in the office, Brooke had been sent to fetch supplies. The store was quiet. Jade was helping 2 customers at the far end of the counter. Garth sat in one of the 2 armchairs in the main consultation area, documents on the table in front of him and a cup of coffee at his elbow that Claire had brought from the back without being asked. Ashley sat across from her boss and looked at the photograph on the desk. She had walked past it many times before without stopping to think what it meant. Now she looked at it for real. He was 38 when he died, Claire said without preamble. About the same age as the man you laughed at this morning. She wasn't making a calculated comparison. She was simply telling the truth. She told Ashley about the morning the call came, how she had been in the library preparing for the exam she never took, how the notification officer had apologized for delivering the news over the phone, which meant it was already too late for any other option, how she had driven 4 hours home in a state of such complete unreality that afterward she couldn't remember how she had handled the turns. "He kept a flag on the mantel," she said. "They gave it to him at the ceremony 2 years earlier, and he kept it there because he said the flag reminded him why he did that job, not for the government, not for the mission, but for the people. For the ones at home who needed someone to hold the line so they could live their lives without thinking about what it cost to hold that line." Ashley stayed silent. She looked at the man in the photograph for real, the way you look when you finally stop deciding what you think about it. "I want to apologize for this morning," she said. "I have nothing to say in my defense that would make what I did normal. I'm very sorry." Garth looked at her. He assessed her the way he assessed most things. Without hurry, without show. "Thank you for saying that," he answered. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't erasing the morning. Claire walked him to the door. The July sun was at its zenith and the parking lot shimmered with that particular white Texas heat at noon. Garth stopped on the step, one hand resting on the doorframe, and turned back to her. "Exactly the sign," he said. "It's him," she said. He nodded slowly, looking at the sign above the entrance as if reading something in it that hadn't been there a second ago. "He would have liked this place," he said. And after a pause, "He would have liked what you've made of it." Claire stood in the doorway and watched him cross the parking lot. She said nothing more. There was nothing more to say, and somewhere in the years after her father's death she had come to understand that some moments close with silence. He reached his pickup, an old dark blue F-150, the kind you use, not the kind you show off. He didn't look back before he climbed in. She watched the truck pull out of the parking space, reach the exit, and pause for a second at the road. Then she went back inside. Garth sat in the pickup for a moment before starting it. He placed his hands on the wheel and looked through the windshield at some distant point, the way you look at nothing when you are really looking at something inside yourself. The box from the gun store lay on the passenger seat. The documents were folded in a bag beside it. He thought of Diana. Not the end, not the hospital, but that quiet Tuesday in October when she simply became an earlier version of the one he kept in memory. Diana at the kitchen table with coffee and crossword puzzles on a Sunday morning, barefoot. Diana at Sophie's first school play, catching his eye across the auditorium in that special, intimate way couples develop over years of paying attention to the things they both love. Diana on the back porch on summer evenings before the diagnosis, talking about things that seemed ordinary then and enormous now. Whether they should get a dog, whether Sophie would lean toward music or sports, what they wanted the next 10 years to look like. They were so concrete. They built so many plans. And then the plan simply ended, the way things end, without announcement, and he was left alone in the house with his 8-year-old daughter and the blueprints of a life that no longer had an architect. Diana, 2 weeks before she died, with that special clarity that sometimes comes at the end. You two are going to be all right. Both of you. I need you to know that. He hadn't fully believed it, but he held on to it the way you hold something that might turn out to be true. He thought of the woman who had walked out through the back door of that store at 11:14 that morning, of the expression on her face when he named his unit, and of how she had given him the military salute, not as a gesture, not as part of customer service, but as an act from a woman who knew the meaning of that salute at the price of the highest possible loss and still chose to do it. He thought of what she had said in the office about her father, about what this store existed for. He thought of how she had looked at Sophie's drawing, not glancing, not out of politeness, but with the full weight of her attention. There was something in Claire Harrow that he recognized the way you recognize a key that fits the same lock as yours. Not identical, not interchangeable, but made for the same door. He picked up his phone and called Sophie. She answered on the second ring, which meant she was somewhere comfortable, probably on the couch, probably watching something she wasn't supposed to watch before lunch. "Hey, Bug," he said. Dad pause, that energetic, special pause of an 8-year-old reorienting to the conversation. "Did you buy it? Did you buy ice cream too?" Garth laughed. It was the first time all morning he had laughed, and the laugh came easy and real, the way laughter does when it isn't forced. "I didn't buy ice cream," he said, "but we can fix that. I'm heading home." "Okay." Another pause. "Dad, you sound different." He thought about it. Different in a good way or a bad way. A long, thoughtful silence. Sophie's pauses were always longer than you expected. She had inherited that from Diana. Good different, she decided. "I'll be home in 20 minutes, he said. He started the pickup as he pulled out of the parking lot. He checked the rearview mirror out of habit, an automatic reflex inherited from years of training that had become instinct. In the mirror, he saw the front of the Mountain Earl Adams gun store receding, and in the doorway, barely visible, Claire Harrow standing with her arms crossed, watching his truck pull onto the road. She turned and went inside before he merged into traffic. He drove home, but the image of her standing there stayed with him for the rest of the day, all evening, and was still somewhere in a quiet corner of his mind when he turned off the light in Sophie's room that night and paused for a moment in the dark hallway, listening to his daughter breathe. 3 weeks later, Garth pulled into the parking lot of the Mountain Earl Adams gun store on a Saturday morning. Same truck, same jacket, same boots, but he wasn't alone. Sophie climbed out of the passenger side with that enthusiastic, slightly chaotic look 8-year-olds have when getting out of a car, and in her hand she carried a sheet of paper she had protected the whole way with the seriousness children reserve for truly important things. She had been working on it since Thursday and told Garth it was for that lady from the gun store. When he asked how she knew about the lady from the gun store, Sophie gave him that long-suffering look she had inherited entirely from her mother and said he talked about her more than he thought. He didn't argue. Claire was behind the main counter when they walked in. She looked up at the sound of the door and her face did what faces do when someone unexpected but welcome arrives. A brief brightening quickly brought under control. She looked at Sophie, then at Garth. Sophie crossed the floor with the determination of a child who has made a decision and is acting on it. She held out the sheet of paper with both hands. "I drew your store," she said. "Dad told me about it." Claire took the drawing carefully and looked at it. It was done in that ambitious mixed media style typical of 3rd grade. Crayons and markers everywhere, a little pencil, perspective where feeling won over geometry. There was the building drawn in brown with the sign above it. In front stood a man in a brown jacket and beside him a woman with reddish blonde hair, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Both were smiling. Claire looked at the drawing for a long time. She didn't say anything right away, and Garth recognized the quality of that silence. It was the same silence he had sat in inside his pickup 3 weeks earlier. The silence of someone letting something settle into the place where it matters. "It's beautiful," she said at last. "I used the good markers," Sophie informed her with the sincere pride of someone explaining her creative process. "The ones I'm not allowed to use for homework." Claire smiled a real smile, an open one. "I'm going to hang it on the wall," she said. In the office. Ashley had come out of the stockroom at the sound of the door and now stood at the end of the counter watching Sophie with an expression completely different from any she had worn 3 weeks earlier. Quieter, more thoughtful. She walked around the counter and crouched down to Sophie's level. "This is really good," she said. "You're a good artist." Sophie looked at her appraisingly. "Thank you," she said. "My dad says if you're going to do something, do it right." Ashley looked up at Garth. He met her gaze and nodded slowly, without hurry. It wasn't full forgiveness, it wasn't erasing that morning, but it was something like recognition. The recognition that a person had looked at herself and decided to become different, and that this decision deserved to be seen. Ashley nodded back. Then she stood and went back to work, and somewhere in the distance between who she had been 3 weeks ago and who she stood as now, a door had opened and she had decided to walk through it. Garth turned and found Claire beside him. "She wants to take the safety course," he said. "I looked on your website at the kids' programs for children whose parents," he paused, "for children from single-parent families. They run on Saturday mornings," Claire said. "The first class starts in about 20 minutes. "Perfect timing," he said. "Very perfect," she agreed. She led Sophie to the training room in the back of the store, a real room with small chairs, a table, and all that patient infrastructure created by someone who has thought a lot about what children need to feel safe while learning something serious. Sophie went without hesitation, because she was her father's daughter and hesitation was not in her nature. Garth stood in the doorway watching her find a seat in the front row, then stepped back into the sales floor and stood the way he always stood. Jacket, jeans, boots, hands relaxed at his sides, waiting. Behind the counter Jade was restocking the accessory case. She glanced at him and gave a slight nod. In that nod there was more than the gesture itself said. He nodded back the same way. The morning light fell clean and even through the front windows. When Claire came out of the training room and quietly closed the door behind her, she stopped beside Garth in the doorway. For a moment neither of them spoke. "She's going to do well," Claire said. "She does well at everything she decides to do," Garth said. Claire nodded. She was quiet for a moment. "The class lasts an hour. There's coffee in the office if you want." She stopped and began again. "Or you can wait here." He looked at her. "That's what I plan to do." Pause. "The class is every Saturday," Claire said. "So if she wants to come next week she will," Garth said. Claire turned slightly toward him. "Just her." He held her gaze. And this time the smile that appeared on his face was not the enigmatic, impenetrable calm of a man who had learned to reveal nothing. It was a simple, sure, and completely real smile. The smile of someone who has lived long enough to know the difference between what is worth keeping and what is worth allowing yourself to feel. "No," he said quietly. "Not just her. Some mornings change more than they first appear to. They begin as one ordinary transaction, one routine, one normal Saturday in a normal town, and end as something completely different. They don't announce themselves. They don't come with any special sign that this is the morning you will remember. They simply happen, the way all important things happen, moment by moment, in the small ordinary space between who you were and who you are becoming. A man walks into a store. 3 women, in the first 5 seconds, decide who he is. Then a door opens and someone who has learned to look at the world with the eyes of a person who has lost something irreplaceable looks at that man and sees him. Not his jacket. Not his silence. Not that special weariness of someone who has carried more than his share for longer than anyone around him knows. She sees him. And because he was seen, something that had been closed for a long time cracks open just a little and lets in a bit of light. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't bring back what was lost. But it changes the shape of the morning. And the shape of the morning changes the shape of the weeks that follow. And the weeks become something that, from a certain angle, starts to look like a beginning. Sometimes all it takes to cross the distance is one person who knows how to look at another and see the real person, the one who was there all along, waiting quietly in the corner chair, back to the wall and eyes on the door. Patient as stone. Steady as something that has already walked through fire and come out the other side.